So there are a lot of people here who are very interested in hearing, more about what the GLO does, and your perspective as we sort of go into this period. You referred to $100 oil, and of course we're no longer in an era of $100 oil, and we're in an era of extended drought and prolonged drought. I mean, California is in a world of hurt right now. We've had a bit of a break, although it was announced that we are easing back into drought again. So we're going to sort of run through a couple of questions and sort of see if people can understand better what you're doing and how you're looking at a number of these issues. So what specific energy-related activities does GLO engage in? You talked about the leases, but beyond that.
Well, I like to say that the General Land Office is almost involved in every single aspect of energy production in the state of Texas. We are one of the few states, compared to some of our fellow border states and other western states, that actually owns and manages its own minerals. And so historically, that's been our bread and butter practice, is managing oil and gas minerals. My predecessor actually signed the largest offshore wind farm development lease to a European company during his term. We're actually visiting with, including Solar City and other solar developers. We get pitched all the time on the development of solar panel developments. Hydropower and thermal power is another interesting area that we're examining. We are not a regular, sometimes we get confused a lot with the Railroad Commission in Texas, which is the regulator of oil and gas activity, or the TCQ, which regulates water and coastal issues. We are truly an asset manager, so our fiduciary duty every day is to make money for the state of Texas so legislators can be prudent with taxpayer dollars and make wise investments for our state and positioning it for the 21st century. So we've got to look at every form of energy out there, which we have been successful in doing. We were recently pitched by everybody from water developers to solar to wind, which we're excited about. But on the oil and gas side, we look forward to reporting the first CO2 capture project, which would, in a partnership with NRG out of Houston and Hilcor, owned by Jeffrey Hildebrandt, to capture CO2 out of a coal-powered electricity plant in Houston and re-inject CO2 into a legacy Exxon Mobil field to frack, to re-inject and generate more hydrocarbons. And so there's a lot of innovation taking place in the oil and gas patch, and as an asset manager, we're trying to get in the middle of a lot of those deals.
And I think some people are aware that CO2 is being used as a form of enhanced oil recovery. So the ability to take something that is usually a problem and to actually enhance recovery of what otherwise would be stranded reserves in oil fields. Jeff and NRG are certainly at the front of that, and it's great that you guys are involved. But talking about that, the big buzz, I mean, we've been watching it, we've been reading about it, we've been waiting for it, and of course, it's Pemex and it's the, opening up of Mexican energy and the Mexican energy reform. So how do you view that, and what's the impact for Texas and beyond, the U.S.?
Well, as you mentioned, Amanda, I'm a private businessman. I've been an entrepreneur all my life, and one of the exciting things as a consultant was visiting with so many Texas business owners that were excited to examine the opportunity in Mexico, and that continue to be all over North America. And I think long term, it's geologically speaking one of the most exciting development plays that's available to North American developers. From a midstream perspective, you're already seeing great midstream companies, including one of our corporate sponsors, Howard Energy, that's connecting cheap Texas natural gas to CFE terminals in North Mexico. I think based on my last briefing, I'm not sure if a representative from CFE will be here today, but there you go. I mean, but several thousand kilometers need to be developed in the next several years. And this creates an opportunity for American midstream companies to build out this infrastructure to transport products to Mexico. And this is an issue, candidly, we're dealing with domestically in the U.S. as it relates to Keystone, which we can leave the politics aside on that. Yeah. But there's a really interesting opportunity with the widening of the Panama Canal. The fact, and I had a chance recently to go with several legislators that examined the global LNG tanker market. Right now, only 8% can travel through the Panama Canal, between Asia and the Texas Gulf Coast. And with the widening this summer of the Panama Canal, over 92% of the global tanker fleet will be able to travel through. So as the Cheniere terminal is completed in the Sabine Pass in Louisiana, and a few more hopefully in Texas that will be developed in short order, the travel time to transport natural gas to Asia and hopefully to our friends in Eastern Europe and the Ukraine will be shortened dramatically. So a lot of exciting things happening.
Well, politics aside, for those in the private sector, we need to be able to export. We need to be able to continue to develop our resources. And of course, we know that the Eagle Ford Shale does not stop at the border, that the Eagle Ford Shale doesn't recognize international boundaries. And so the opportunity for development in Mexico and for cross-sharing on technology is pretty, there's great opportunities there. But in talking about exports, the crude export ban, how does that affect you? How does it affect the GLO? I mean, you've got a mandate, you're an asset manager, you've got these assets, you want to maximize and optimize your asset value, and you're kind of sitting there a little bit bound. So how do you view that?
Well, from a public policy perspective, it would unduly benefit the school children of Texas if we're in a position where we can export crude oil. The Commerce Secretary has allowed for limited exports of crude oil to Mexico in the form of swaps, but it's an antiquated rule. The fact is, with the innovation of technologies, we're in a position as a country to be a much better friend and supporter to our friends abroad, and by releasing this antiquated rule, we can get there in short order. And so there are some arguments against it, and it would unduly benefit, but on a net basis, it benefits the GLO in the state of Texas. In the House, they recently passed the passage of the lifting of the ban. We'll see how it plays out in the Senate. But this president has been very clear that he would be against any crude export ban. So we're working on that. I'm spending a lot of time in Washington, D.C., along with legislators and the private sector, to bring more of a private sector perspective on how we can environmentally protect the development of our natural resources, but how this would be a patriotic, pro-American strategy to not only strengthen our ties abroad, but really consolidate our energy platform among Canada, the United States, and Mexico.
And making this region more energy independent, obviously. So we've talked about energy, and then something near and dear to my heart is water. And we find ourselves, 2011, historic drought in the state of Texas, and again, just read that we're slipping back into a drought here at the end of the season. So we all know that the buzzword, water energy nexus, and we know that water and energy are inextricably intertwined, and we know you need energy to push water, and you need water to make energy. So when you think about water, there's a lot of water underneath state lands, brackish water, fresh water in the aquifers. So how do you view the water space? We connect you with energy, but water's right there.
Well, in the state of Texas, we have a population of 26 million. We are projected to grow to 40 million by 2040. And yet, as you had mentioned, Amanda, despite having good precipitation this spring, 50% of our state is in drought. So we face a huge challenge if the state is going to continue growing unless we deal with this issue. Conservation has to be part of the mix. Oil and gas industry is the first to be blamed for water consumption, but in our state, the energy industry consumes less than 5%, and that's been documented. And my friends, my most important endorsement in my race was the Texas Farm Bureau, but I share with them that agriculture, as in many countries and many states, consumes over 70% of our water in the state of Texas. And so should we look at different technologies that are actually utilized in Mexico that do a better job of conserving water in the irrigation space? Yeah, we should. Should we incentivize the ag industry to be more mindful of the usage of water? We should. Should we trap more of our groundwater as it flows down from the high plains to the Gulf Coast? We should. We should examine opportunities in the desal space, whether it's onshore brackish water or offshore desal, as we're seeing here in San Diego. So pivoting back to what we do at the GLO, we're an asset manager, we need to make money. And so we've recently announced a memorandum of understanding with Sir Richard Branson, who wants to enter this space as a business opportunity. So it's a win-win for us where we could generate money for the PSF, but also provide a huge source of water, refined water, to industrial needs, whether it's chemical companies, petrochemical facilities, refineries in the Corpus Christi area, which is a huge need that we have on our Gulf Coast.
And when we've talked, and I know I've talked to people in your office as well, that you're beginning to think about water beneath state lands differently. It's not just water anymore, it's actually potentially a resource, and it's something you can do something with. So as you think about reuse and recycling, the GLO is sort of looking at that differently now.
When I came into office, one of the first questions I asked is, do we have a reserve report of the state's oil and gas minerals? And as it turns out, we haven't had a full auditing and a full reserve report. So we undertook that, and we're in the process of doing that in the water space. Brackish water can easily be used for everything from potable purposes to industrial purposes, for fracking, for a whole variety of usages. Why, at the state level, why aren't we examining this opportunity? Some geologists say that there's enough brackish water in Texas to cover the entire state's geography up to a foot. So there's plenty of brackish water under state lands. We just need to think through the economic way in which we can do this efficiently. I can't tell you how many private developers approach our office on a weekly basis saying, what can we do to examine this opportunity? How can we partner up? I know several developers are here as part of this conference. But this could be the next generational opportunity for not only the state, but for private businesses in Texas.
We also talked a little bit about looking at the environmental, impact, and I know GLO is does not ignore the environment. It's a part of what you think about when you're making all of these decisions. So, coastal flows, coastal impact, and I know you're looking at that as well.
This is a huge essential portion of what we do at the GLO, is protecting the Texas coast. One of my predecessors, Gary Mauro, created the first, and now it's the largest volunteer organization in Texas, which is the Adopt a Beach Cleanup Program. And I've had a chance to travel throughout the 367 miles of our Gulf Coast, and it's nothing short of remarkable of what this agency does with nonprofit and private sector participation. Large oil and gas diversified companies are sponsors and bring their volunteers out to clean up the Texas beach. But when you take a step back and you look at the state of Texas, you'll find that we are the only Gulf Coast state that doesn't have a Corps of Engineer compliant plan to deal with the next hurricane. And so that's what I'm prioritizing in the next legislative session, is to work with the Corps of Engineers at the federal level to make sure that 10 years after Katrina and 8 years after Ike and Dolly, that our state is prepared for the next big one. We're also the first responder on all oil spills on the Gulf Coast. We work with the Mexican government and Pemex to make sure that we're responding to all incidents that take place offshore, particularly as Pemex develops offshore and in the wake of the BP Deepwater Horizon spill, which our agency was involved with in terms of the final negotiation. There's a lot that we can do to implement the new technologies to make sure that we're being as safe as we possibly can in terms of offshore development of oil. And so I invite folks to visit with our oil spill teams. We have 5 of them that are prepared at any moment to deal with any huge, large offshore spill. And that's a role that we take very seriously at the Land Office.
So you've talked about the fact that oil and gas has been traditionally your bread and butter, and you've sort of run through the litany of wind and solar and water as a different ways of generating revenue. So you're thinking about this differently. And you guys also support this forum, and you've been, the land offices for a long time has been supporting this forum. Why is it so important?
Well, to be honest with you, I'm a private businessman. The government doesn't have all the answers to the problems. The private sector is where innovation takes place. That warrants an applause. That's okay. And that's coming from a politician. It's the private sector that innovates, particularly in the energy business. And so, whether it's water, for example, we need to rely upon the private sector to partner with. In the oil and gas space, we don't develop the minerals. The private sector does. As a custodian of the state's assets, my job is to negotiate a fair deal for the school children of Texas to protect the environment, but it is not our responsibility to develop that. The expertise is in the private sector, so we recognize that. And so we want this forum to be a true deal maker experience, where next year we go to Mexico City and hopefully you see a bunch of American businessmen, Canadian businessmen and women that come in and offer opportunities to, whether it be upstream to downstream in Mexico and vice versa. Next year when we come back to the US, hopefully we bring it back to Texas, and the same would apply. So that's our viewpoint, and that's the spirit of Texas, frankly, that we tend to do better as a state when we reduce the size and scope of bureaucracy in government.
Well, I think a lot of people would say amen to that. Again, thinking about the obstacles to development. But the GLO is very pro-business, and that is part of how you were focusing on this and encouraging, new ways of looking at it to generate revenue. So any last comments before we sort of wrap up?
Well, again, I really thank you all's participation. We look forward to really ramping this up. This is my first opportunity to join the forum. We look forward to returning back to Mexico next year. But we have a new social media presence. I encourage you to check out our Twitter and Facebook feed, where we discuss all the trans-border commercial activities that are taking place. We look forward to inviting our Canadian friends as part of the forum to expand this, to think more along the lines of NAFTA. Here we are 20 years after NAFTA, and the most successful economic development program probably ever in human history. And so let's piggyback off of that, and in the next generation, transform that in the energy space. So I thank you all for your attention and consideration, y que les vayan bien.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.